This is the Inner Chief Podcast, episode 355.
When I saw that footage of an absolute fireball just exploding out of one of the engine inlets and engulfing part of the superstructure of the ship in flames, and it torched two IRBs or Zodiacs were melted instantly and just turned into a rubbery goo. And I'm looking at that fireball being like, oh my God, this isn't the kind of toaster fire. This ship that's an explosion. And then it went, and then it kind of, you trigger, you're like, yeah, we actually might be getting the lifeboats here. This is going to get pretty hairy.
G'day, this is the Inner Chief Podcast, episode 355. And our guest today is David Knoff, Antarctic Expedition Leader and author on high-stakes risk and crisis management and being adaptable around your mission. I am your host, Greg Layton, founder of Chiefmaker and the Council of Chiefs. I believe there is a great chief in all of us, and that through listening to the stories, strategies and techniques of great CEOs and gurus, each of you can find and leave your own legacy through your work and life. The Inner Chief Podcast is where you will learn how to think and make moves like a CEO, like a true chief. For over a decade, I've helped CEOs and senior executives around the world boldly lead change, inspire their people, and leave a legacy. On the Inner Chief Podcast, I bring these stories to life with deep diving CEO interviews, interspersed with minisodes covering key leadership challenges, so you will find your own path to greatness as an executive. In this episode, I chat to David Knoff. David brings 15 years of experience and expertise in diplomacy, conflict resolution, resilience, and remote leadership in some of the world's most challenging environments where he has faced extreme adversity head-on. From serving as a young Platoon Commander in the Solomon Islands to a pivotal diplomatic posting in Pakistan during a period of intense regional conflict, David's journey has been shaped by moments that demand empathy, adaptability, and strength in uncertainty. David took a sabbatical as a photographer in Turkey, capturing the stories of refugees escaping the Syrian conflict, before working in high-stakes environments to contribute to the international fight against ISIS. More recently, he led Australia's Davis Research Station in Antarctica, navigating the isolation of COVID-19 and an extended mission in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Off the back of that, he has just released a book called 537 Days of Winter, and he discusses in the episode the harrowing life and death story that inspired him. In today's masterclass, David will share being comfortable with uncertainty and not being under control, his anecdotal evidence on human response mechanisms to fear and threat, how to factor in risk and crisis management in strategic planning, and balancing this process with instinctive action, and being adaptable around your mission. In particular, his experiences during the COVID-19 induced extended mission where they were stranded in the Antarctic. Chiefs, without further ado, let's hear from the incredibly inspiring and resilient David Knoff. G'day, Chiefs. I'm here with the one and only David Knoff, Antarctic Expedition Leader, author, and speaker, an all-around good guy. You're in for a treat today, team. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg, and g'day, Chiefs.
Oh, wonderful. I think you're one of the first guests who's ever said that. Fantastic. You're in the mode, mate. We're ready to go. Now, listen, mate, you know we have a great tradition at the Inner Chief. We love to know where our leaders come from. Can you tell a bit of a story that sums up your childhood and early life?
Yeah, so I grew up in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, in a suburb called Glen Waverley. And the probably defining part of my childhood for my siblings, well, I've got an older brother and a younger sister, so I was stuck in the middle, was our family revolved around Dad's business. And Mum was a director of the business as well, and in earlier years had a much more hands-on role. But so we ran an automotive parts importer and distributor. And that was just the family life. It started as a small business, got towards sort of a medium business by the time it all wrapped up. And it was such a pivotal thing that every weekend and school holidays we'd work out there. So that was really my first job, and for my brother and sister as well. We do everything from picking orders in the warehouse on our skateboards and running, which obviously, yes, is pre sort of modern WHS. Probably wouldn't put next days with forklifts and stuff. But you'd pick orders on the skateboards in the warehouse and answer the phones and do all sorts of just running around. And it gave us a good sense. I think that set us up with a good work ethic of not so much a 9 to 5 mentality, but you're part of something and you're part of a business and it's life. And that meant, and it sort of travelled with us as well. So we had interstate offices. So often when we would go on a family holiday up to the Goldie where my other cousins live, Dad would then go up to Brisbane and see the office up there and these different elements. So I think there was good work-life balance in being a family business. So that was pivotal. But then the biggest sort of shock then was, so my father died when I was 13, and then that was just a complete sort of end to that. It took a while for Mum to wrap up the business and sell it and stuff. But that was then something that I think defined my childhood and upbringing. And you grow up pretty quick when your father dies. It's so suddenly and at such a pivotal age. I was 13, my brother's a couple of years older, my sister was a year or two younger. And at that point, you've got a family that's now trying to deal with wrapping up quite a large business at that point, wrapping that up. You've lost your dad. You're trying to be a teenager. You grow up straight away. And I think that was something that set myself and my siblings up for success later on. But at the time, it really hurt. It really takes a hit, and in a lot of ways takes away that opportunity to be a proper, rambunctious, rebellious teenager, because you just go, I can't. It's just sort of not the right atmosphere to do that. So that was probably the defining thing. And still, it's actually good. It would have been Dad's 80th birthday this weekend, so we're all going out for lunch. Yeah, which would be interesting. Anyway.
No, it'll be great. Sounds like a good tradition to maybe go back and honour him, even though it's been passed for quite some time now.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that story, David. Yeah. So the next question normally is, what was your first ever job? But I think, well, you sort of answered that. But what came after that then, like in your later teenage years?
So we kept doing that. Dad didn't pay very well, so I did eventually need to get a better pay. I think we'd get $20 a day or something when you were working at it. But you got Macca's for lunch. It was all the lunch lady. You get a pie if the lunch lady wasn't there. But then eventually, when I was sort of 14 and 9 months, as young as you could be, picked up a job at McDonald's, working there, and that was a good. I think Macca's isn't any big organisation, is a pretty good place to start. Opposite from a lot of people do start at a family business or work in somewhere like that. So you've got that option. Macca's and others are another good place where you've got all the systems, you've got the very formal recruiting processes, very set training programs of how that all works. And I worked at Macca's through school and had a few other odd jobs working at, then I went on and worked at Kmart, worked at a pub and worked at a reception center as the barman and a waiter, and mostly your standard teenager sort of jobs that gave me a good mix of different environments,
lots
different
of experiences.
Yeah. And lots of dealing with people, I think. And that's something that then I now look back on and look at the careers I've had since in diplomacy and other things, that early on in your teenage years and your first work years, where you're working in hospitality and you're working with people, you learn so much about customer service and interactions and how to kind of keep a smiling face, even though you're like, oh, this customer is completely wrong. I remember a great incident at Macca's actually, where a customer, I still do it to this day. I know I got their order correct, but they came back and they were just like adamant that I'd stuffed it up and I'd given them the wrong stuff. And they were then kind of cagey about and it was just clearly some sort of scam where they wanted some free food. And I'm trying to tell the manager, I'm like, no, this guy, like, he ordered a McChicken meal. That's what he's got. He's claiming he's ordered all this other stuff and he hasn't paid for it. And the manager just kind of pushed me to one side and gave him everything he wanted and got him out of the store. And I'm like, but and she's like, that's just the way we deal with that sort of stuff. We get him in, like, yep, you're probably right, but don't argue with him. And I'm like, but he just got free Maccas. This is ridiculous. So that's how I want to. Yeah, but learning those things about human interaction, customer service, and everything are vital at a young age.
Yeah, and sometimes you can fan the flame of something that is really a non-issue. $50 worth of Maccas when you've got a massive issue in your hand in the store. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and they were great. I remember they were doing a McHappy Day where we were working with the Melbourne Tigers, the basketball team. They came in and we were that was pretty funny. And that was probably one of those moments I realized my basketball career wasn't going to go very well because I was probably 6 foot. I'm 6'3" now. I was probably about 6'1" at the time in sort of year 10 or 11.
Right.
And I played center, and then chatting to the point guard of I can't remember his name, the point guard of the Melbourne Tigers at the time.
Yeah.
And he was taller than me, and I'm like, this isn't going to work. Like I don't play point guard. I don't know how to play that position. I'm playing center. I've always played center, and I'm just not going to be tall enough. So
tall enough.
Gave up on the dream.
No, well, you can't be everything, mate.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep. And mate, what was your first ever car?
First ever car. Like I came from an automotive family, so there's a few different versions on this. So the first car I ever drove was a Leyland Mini. Was at a hill climb called the Rob Roy Hill Climb. Was a mate had a Leyland Mini. We're about 13 or 14, and a mate's dad sort of took us for a lesson. So that was the first car I drove, and that was a lot of fun to drive on a hill climb in a little front wheel drive. Yeah. But then I had a Honda Prelude. Was my first car as a P plate, but I quickly traded that in or sold it and bought a Datsun 260Z, which was much cooler, and then restored that and got it up to a really good place. And that was, for anyone that knows me, they consider that to me my first car.
Your first love. Yeah.
And I've still got it. So
really,
yeah, wow. I've kept it in storage. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie from Eric Bana, Love the Beast.
Love the Beast.
His car. And if I hadn't seen that movie, I probably would have sold the Datsun, but I've kept it in storage. It sits up in a shed in the ACT, in nice dry storage there, and I'm waiting for the time and opportunity to restore it and get it, do Targa or something like that.
Oh, that'd be magnificent. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, let's get into the real stuff, mate. We'll set the scene here. As you went through your career, became station leader at the Davis Research Station in Antarctica. When COVID hit, you were leading 24 expeditioners in a standard mission. International travel came to a halt. Everything was standstill. You guys were stuck in Antarctica indefinitely. So what was meant to be a routine mission became this cauldron of uncertainty and pressure and survival and anxiety, and everyone gets pushed to, I'm guessing, the mental, physical, spiritual limits, and you had to draw on everything, your military background, the whole works. And so it ends up going for 537 days. Now, I remember doing the long lockdowns in Melbourne, and they were like over 100 days. And that nearly drove me to spare, mate. I was going crazy. I actually threw a remote control across a room one day when Daniel Andrews is on the TV. Yeah, let's not go down that angle. But so I've got a few questions first. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of how this played out, did anything change in Antarctica? Like, it's a very quiet, peaceful place. Melbourne transformed, like it went from this thriving, buzzing hub to just eerily quiet. Did anything change environmentally in Antarctica?
Not due to COVID, but there's a massive change there in the seasons. So you don't really get the autumn and spring. You basically just have summer and winter. It's and summers, it's 24 hours of daylight. The temperatures will get over zero, and you can get all your work done. And it comes alive. You've got all the penguins, all the seals, all the whales. Everyone's there in summer, and then in the wintertime, it's just pitch dark. The wildlife disappears. It all goes out to sea or hibernate. Like it's gone. Emperor penguins are the one exemption from that. They do hang around in the wintertime. But and I wouldn't say it's quiet though, because the howling winds in the winter weather are just extremes. So you're looking at 200 kilometre an hour winds, not uncommon. Not every day, but certainly you'll have you might have a week of near cyclonic winds, and so that's how it changes. But the change from COVID, which even lasted for a couple of years, was that unfortunately the first thing we had to reduce. It had an impact for us of having to stay a lot longer, but it also meant that we didn't send any scientists down for a couple of summers, or very, very reduced numbers. So what is ordinarily a very busy, frantic summer season where all the scientists will come in, you'll have your helicopters and planes and boats and having to move them around and go and get their samples or go to their locations and set up their instruments and do what they need to do. That all slowed down or was taken away from a number of stations, not just the Australian program, but international partners as well. So there were a few summers there where Antarctica just didn't have the frenzied summer activity that it normally does.
Yeah, wow. Can you describe what it's like on a picture perfect day in Antarctica. Like where it just doesn't get any worse.
I love this because I describe this day in the book because it was just one of the most hashtag Antarctica days you could ever had. And in the Goldilocks zone, so the first summer, so we'd left in October 2019, well before the pandemic, and the first summer that we had down there was about 100 of us on station, give or take, with different flights and different things. And really early on in the piece, I had to go out and do my own training as part of the team. Everyone has to get trained on Antarctic field travel and survival and all sorts of stuff. But as part of that training, I mean, we jumped on the quad bikes and we'd spend 3 days, 2 nights out in the field, driving around. And you're driving around on the frozen ocean, so sea ice, which at this point is sort of 2 meters thick. And you're driving around on these bikes, and there's just 5 of us. It was like myself, the field leader who has got a field training officer who's got to stay for the winter, the doctor, a plumber, I can't remember the trade of the other guy. Anyway, so there are 5 of us just hooning around. One of the meteorologists, or the meteorological team and stuff. And we're just driving around on the bikes, and in between icebergs that are the size of skyscrapers, you don't go too close to them, but you're certainly close enough to see the size of them. You've got seals and penguins, and you're just going, this is incredible. And so we spent the whole first day out driving the bikes about 30 Ks away. We'd stop and do all these recovery drills and different tests and all sorts of stuff to learn about the field and how to use the bikes safely, how to set up emergency refuges and camps and radio comms and navigation on the ice using the equipment and maps that we had, which navigation down there is quite an art because the magnetic, if anyone has ever navigated, the magnetic deviation down at the poles is ridiculous. You're talking about kind of 90-degree things, and then every map will change drastically as well because you're so close to the magnetic South Pole. So your compasses do some really, and there's huge rock deposits and everything as well. So you get some really odd navigational challenges down there, and also the freezing cold. A lot of GPS units and your watches and other things will start to freeze, and the batteries don't last. So navigation. Anyway, so you're learning all that stuff. But we get to the end of the first day, and we're at this hut, which is about 30 Ks north of the station, and it's perched up on the rocks. And the radio call comes in there to say, just the weather's perfect. It's blue skies, no wind, maybe 2 or 3 degrees. So just perfect conditions. And the call comes in and says, hey, it's perfect conditions we're going to send the helicopters out to do a low light reconnaissance of this glacier where we like to fly over the glaciers. Anywhere we're going to land on a glacier, we always go in a couple of days before or prior to, when there's a low sun angle, which helps identify the crevasses. You get this beautiful angle of the sun reflecting off the top of the ice, and you can see the deviations in the surface, which will identify the crevasse fields and help you pick a safe landing zone. But we had to sign off on that risk, and that was something that ultimately came back to me. And so they said, we're going to send the helicopters up to come pick up Dave, and he'll jump on this flight with his other field officers, and they're going to fly out and go have a look at this glacier. So I've spent a day out on the quad bikes, get to this field hut, then a helicopter spawns in, just sort of jump on the helicopter, then spend an hour or 2 flying off into the sunset. It's now about midnight, which means you've got this perfect low sun angle. So you're flying across an Antarctic glacier at midnight with the sun setting, and you're there to assess safety in crevasse fields, but you also just go, this is incredible. Flying around, and then, sure enough, land back at the hut, have a cup of tea, go to bed, get up the next day and jump on the quad bikes again. So that was probably the most rock star hashtag Antarctica experience you could ever get, and something that you can't even pay for that experience. Like even if you went to, it's just something that is just lined up to go, that is just one of the best days of your life.
Wow. That is cool. Let's just stop the podcast.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, done. Yeah. And it was easy. And it was a piece of cake. Yes.
You've got a lot of memory now. Like I can imagine that. Live in your shoes for a minute. Okay. Right. Yeah. Well, I love extremes. What was the most brutal day down there?
Yeah, and that's the flip side. So if that rockstar day happened within the first month of being there, fast forward almost an entire year later. So if that was, say, in November 2019, let's go to November 2020. We're now 12 months into a trip that was supposed to be 12 months, and we're staring down the barrel of at least another four or so months there, and not entirely sure at this point that we went and how we'll get home and what home's even going to look like. And that was when the team really rose to the moments and the occasion that was given to us, but it also pushed people to their breaking point. And that was the darkest and toughest day from the leadership perspective, and then also the community perspective, is when to really get into it, the one member of the team who'd been struggling up to that point, as we all had, with a whole range and raft of challenges, from your life back home to your life on station to the monotony of your job, the uncertainty of when are we getting home, what's home going to look like, why haven't they organised this, what about this, what about all these different things that are running through your head, and everything's out of your control. You don't know what to do. You're grasping for stuff that's not there, and mental health practices that may have helped you 6 months ago or 2 weeks ago are now doing nothing. You're finding no joy. All of that. And we had one member of the team then, just for a number of reasons, he lashed out and just said, "Hey, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to work. I don't stuff this, stuff you, stuff this whole project. I quit. I don't want to work here anymore." And I was just sitting there pulling my hair out going, "Mate, you can't, like, what do you mean you quit? You can't." And he's like, "I can." And I just did. And it was then this just debacle of, I've got to get this guy back to work. He can't, like, if we could get people home, we would have sent people home. Like, it was that simple. We knew we were there. There was operational reasons why we had to stay longer and keep the station running. And the rest of the team are like, what is he doing? And you're just like, you're either part of the solution that we're going to work with the team of, it was about 5 of us around it, directly involved with trying to find a way to help him out as an individual, and then as a workplace. You've got these different, you're living with your team as well. That's the challenge. So I just remember that period, probably went for about a week, where we just had to, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think clearly. It was emotional for everyone involved. And it's not just myself as a leader, but that the whole community are like, "Oh, what the hell? What have we done? How do we help this guy? Are we all in the same boat? Should everyone just quit? Like, what is going on here?" And it was this roller coaster where there wasn't much anyone back home could do to help. There was certainly advice and help from, the HR team and the psychs and all these other people and that. But it really came down to then on the ground, how we as a group were able to help him. We got him back to work and changed his role a little bit and changed some reporting structures, and then had to do that for everyone as well. As a kind of like, well, hey, let's think about everyone here. And it was this really tough reset moment for the group and myself. And that was the darkest moment, I think, in many ways, because it just didn't appear to have a solution. And it's still something that to this day is a kind of mark of just like, oh God, like how did it come to that? How did that happen? And but we got through, and we got there in the end, but that was the worst day, that sort of is the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah. What's going through my mind is the story of Shackleton and how they spent a winter down in the South Pole, and they turned their boats over and they lived under the boats, and there were all these remarkable kind of stories, how they had to stick together through that period. And did you draw any like lessons from his books and his work through that period? Did you guys refer to that a bit?
Absolutely. And so that was one of the things that helped me with that particular scenario. So obviously Shackleton's just up there on the pedestal of Antarctic and leaders for things. And everyone goes to Antarctica in a leadership role would have read Endurance and then Story of Shackleton. And almost anyone that goes down any role is familiar with it. And we always discussed Scott and Shackleton and Amundsen and all the heroes and that sort of stuff. But rereading his book, when I'm sitting there in a moment where I've got a member of my team in the most ridiculous scenario you could ever imagine, you're stuck in an Antarctic station, it's not quite as bad as it was 100 years ago. We had Wi-Fi and a gym and stuff.
What was going through my mind was actually it could be worse now.
Well, but the
more cozy place, but all the external noise and those uncontrollables, whereas his guys were isolated. It's a different kind of problem, but potentially as tricky.
But it comes down to then like the when it changed. So where I got a lot of solace from was the fact that when his ship got crushed and they had to abandon the Endurance and get the lifeboats and drag them across the ice, the carpenter, Chippy McNish, quit and turned around to him and said, "Boss, he killed his cat," because he said the cat couldn't survive. So they'd had this falling out over the carpenter's cat. Shackleton kills the cat. They abandon the ship, and the carpenter just says, "Stuff you, I just signed up to be a ship's carpenter. I didn't sign up to drag boats across the ice. I quit." And Shackleton had to kind of work with him and go through, read the contract and make this agreement of, hey, your contract said you were only going to get paid when you're on the ship. We've abandoned ship, and under maritime law, once the ship was wrecked, you didn't get paid or something. So Shackleton had to kind of say, all right, that's changed, but I will continue to pay everyone for this expedition until we all get home, and we will all get home safely. They got him back to work. And that was one of these moments. So I was sort of rereading that story. I'm like, holy cow. Like, that's like, this is what happened to Shackleton's team. If you go, you take an expedition that everyone's signed up for, of like, hey, we're going to go do this. The minute you change the goalposts, even though it was already ridiculous, you're now changing it to be more ridiculous.
Well, but there are no goalposts.
There are no goalposts. And
because you don't know when you're coming home. And that was it,
right.
Yeah.
And there was some solace in the kind of, well, if the best Antarctic station leader or expedition leader, if he had these sort of issues, then that's, it kind of gave me some solace of like, oh, well, he had these issues. So,
And did you consider rowing a boat from there back to Tasmania? Or?
No, we did joke about it. We didn't have, I think someone did do the math. We had 3 IRBs, so 3 Zodiacs or Zodiac-esque boats. We could maybe make it 20 or 30 miles. So, and you're talking a journey of a couple of thousand back to Australia. So we had no organic solution to get out of there, which dunes, and this was great. So people, they often people be like, oh, but why couldn't they have done this? And I'm like, if you don't think for 1 minute that we sat down there, Friday night, we over drinks, when we'd open the bar up and come up with crazy scenarios for what happens if one day we wake up and the whole, there's been a mutation, the fatality rate goes to 100, and we're now stuck there, last place on Earth. And the only thing we kind of could do, we could have driven to this. There was an Indian, Russian, and Chinese stations that are close. They're co-located or very closely, and we could have driven there, and it would have taken about a week. But we could have loaded up and driven there, and we could have created like a super station with them to have created a bigger community. But at the end of the day, that's still, no one had a ship or a plane or an ability to get off the continent. So we still we could have created some sort of weird super community. And we probably had a couple of years worth of survivability if we'd gone on to extreme rationing. Thankfully, we were rationed. The way we resupply the stations allows that if something like what happened to us happens, or there's a disaster with the ship and the stations don't get resupplied, they do have enough food and fuel to run for a second season. And we've had to go into fuel saving mode on different stations for various different.
Yeah. G'day, Chief. Now, are you in need of an operating rhythm? An operating rhythm is that schedule of meetings. Actually, it's a bit more than that. It's a system, the drumbeat of your team. And what it will do if you get it right is it will create the culture, it will drive the results, it will bond the team together, it will handle risk, help you see around corners, create creativity, embed the rituals and traditions of your team. There is so much that an operating rhythm can deliver when done right. So, Chief, if you'd like to know how to do that, just get our full free resource on it. Just go to chiefmaker.com/operating rhythm, and there's a detailed PDF there with all the hows and whats and whys, some of the pitfalls, and an example schedule for you to follow. chiefmaker.com/operating rhythm, and create the drumbeat for success in your team. Look, you had quite a great career within the military before you joined the Antarctic Division. What did you learn from training in the armed forces that you drew upon later on?
Yeah, I love this question. I think it really speaks to the way military training works, and my other career then after the military is with foreign affairs and trade, but still working in war zones and around conflict, is that you get really comfortable just being out of control or not being in control of everything. And it creates an approach to planning and thinking that is completely flexible and adaptable to whatever the enemy or the conditions are doing. So, for instance, in a war zone, you're worried about the physical enemy. You'll also have bloody dust storms and all sorts of other, and weather. Weather plays a huge part in military planning that often gets forgotten. D-Day was delayed by a day because of weather, all these sorts of things. Bastogne only went well for the Germans because of weather. So you start to realize how susceptible to the elements you are, but then also how out of control you are, and the kind of, no plan ever survives first contact with the enemy, or everyone has a plan until you get hit. Any of those sayings, you really live them, because you'll do your planning, and the military planning process is well renowned for the way they can come up with a plan that'll deal with anything. The second part of that is then how do you adapt your plan or recognize it needs to be thrown out the window and change. And if you try and stick to a plan that's not working, you'll just drive yourself to disaster. And that's the stuff I felt like having careers that had always worked in an environment and locations that you're not in control, you'll have a plan, you'll always have to be adaptive. And that stuff then held me in good stead, I think, going into the Antarctic program where, yeah, you're not getting shot at, you're not getting bombed, etc. But the weather is going to tell you what you can and can't do every day. And also the human conditions around running and leading that team were tricky.
I'm not sure if I'm going to go down a rabbit hole that's wrong here, but I just want to ask a sort of an out there kind of question. Do you think, if you think about operating in that complex adaptive kind of environment that you're talking about, where there is so many unknowns and leaders have to operate based on ever-changing data and very, very complex systems that are unpredictable in their response, compared to what we have now, most of the business or corporate world, where particularly after you get over a certain size, while it might be complex and adaptive, the stakes are so low it doesn't really matter. And so you get these a lot of the times pretty stale, pretty unenergetic kind of environments. Do you think it would almost be better for the people in those environments if they were a bit more chaotic? Which is sort of against all the leadership literature.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be some great arguments to and fro, but then that kind of comes, I know we're going to talk about risk at some point as well, but that sort of comes into as well. You go, okay, when you're a startup or you're a small business or you're really pressed for time, you'll have to take risks because you go, we've only got, and that's another one I think is quintessentially a military thing. And if you've got an hour, you'll use that hour, but you will have the decision and the plan ready to go at that time. Yep. Whereas non-military, it's not completely isolated, but I found working with non-military leaders, time's less of a factor. They'll happily run over the budget over time. Whereas military people, you say, we've got 1 hour until we need till the helicopter takes off. Bang, they're ready to go. And so they'll go, well, we've got 59 minutes to get ready, and then we have 1 minute to take a piss and get on a helicopter. And that's sort of the mentality of, and there's a great saying from one of the ops managers at the Antarctic Division. You say, well, if you leave it to the last minute, it only takes a minute. Or kind of do it early, do it twice. If you start planning too far in advance, you don't quite know what the conditions are and exactly what's going to happen on the day. So there's a sweet spot of planning. I'd agree. Like we were joking about this in the cold plunge ice bath that I go to, which is quite a social little place. If you could do all your planning meetings in an ice bath, geez, you'd be efficient. If you're just sitting there and everyone's trying to go, I'll do 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or if you're Wim Hof, you do a bit longer. But when you've got that compression of time and a restriction, you find it's almost freeing. You're like, oh, great. Well, we've got to make the decision. Let's go. And you're right that when you add in boards and planning processes and then kind of focus groups or feedback loops and everything, which are all really important to make sure you get the decision right, you start to go like, well, have we lost, are we actually going to take a risk here that might work? And I mean, there's pros and cons and there's good and bad examples of.
There's probably like there is a continuum, right? And there's also context. So what would be the right point on the continuum for the context within which we're operating?
That's right.
There wouldn't be many executives out there that would think that more meetings would be better. No. Or that more structure or more red tape would be better. I would, if we surveyed our listeners, I don't think many would go, yes, please. I'd like more meetings. I'd like more time. They'd all say, let's do it faster, shorter, with less people and get things done. Because I think the second part of it is the intuition and the flow gets lost. You've so much time to think about this, and people aren't in a flow. And I was just even watching you talk about these scenarios, I can see you switch into that mode. Right? And I think a lot of leaders are missing that.
And I reckon CEOs are going to say it, but also the people on the floor are going to say the same thing of like, less meetings, more time to actually do the job, and often more decisive leadership is something that a lot of staff would really value. And depending on your industry, I get the beauty now of working with a lot of different corporates and a lot of different industries, and you see it in your high pace, like your kind of ASX trading companies and some of that sort of stuff. Like they still have a fast paced, high risk, high gain reward system where they're just because the bell rings, there's a bell on a computer these days, but that's their day and that's their thing. And they've still got that drive, and you don't, and maybe COVID, I think that's one of the big lessons anyone can take out of COVID was that everyone was forced to live in a world where it was out of control and you had to adapt and you had to respond. and you didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow. You didn't know what Dan Andrews was going to tell you today or tomorrow. And even if he said, no, by Saturday, you'll be able to do this. And it gets to Friday night and he's there with the jacket saying, no, you're not going to the park tomorrow. So everyone had to live in that world, and some went well and others didn't.
Yeah, what's been an interesting outcome of that is I got about halfway through those lockdowns and had the realization that you described before, that my entire mental health regime, which most of it was intuitive and out of my real awareness, was no longer working. So the isolation, as opposed to seeing friends regularly, I wasn't laughing as much as I should. I wasn't as fit as I should be. I wasn't moving just the body every single day. I was reading too much news, much social media, a whole range of things, right? So we actually sat down and created what we called a resilience playbook. And we said, okay, what are all the negative emotions we're feeling? What are the trigger points for those? What's our action and our mantra to get out of this? So we literally created a whole new physical, mental health playbook for lockdown that was different to normal life. And it worked beautifully. Like, we got to the end. No, I mean, we weren't amazing. I was still hairier, whiter, and probably a little bit fatter than the normal Greg. But look, we certainly recovered to a much better space and gave us a real awareness of when you have moves that work in some environments but not in others, you need to adapt.
For sure. I think that's a really good lesson you've sort of touched on there, is around when it's really tough, if it wasn't COVID or I was stuck in Antarctica or whatever it is, there isn't a solution. You're in a wicked problem. There's no clear solution to it. And the only solution is to find a way to kind of keep it ticking forward. And then you won't even know when you're through it. You'll look back. And I was watching this great doco on the Battle of Britain the other night, and they're interviewing all these pilots. And the whole thing was like, they didn't know the Battle of Britain had ended. Like, for them, for now, you look back and like, the Battle of Britain, and that was just like, I didn't know it. For them, it was just where we'd go up every day and would fly, and they'd wake up, and if it was a good day, they'd be like, like good weather, man. A lot of Germans. And so they just day in, day out, that's all they did. And their mental health was a major factor. They're losing friends. Every day might be their last, and the sheer terror and the drinking and the sleeping and all that stuff. But they didn't know it ended. They just had to find a way to get through every day. Then eventually they're like, we've won the Battle of Britain. But
the Germans aren't coming anymore.
We've got them on the back foot. And the threat of invasion is off. And that was sort of one of those things. You never realize you're in the toughest of times, or you realize it, but there's no solution. The best thing you can do, like you did, is kind of analyze it, think about it, come up with a playbook as a toolkit, and work your way through it, but you won't solve it. And you might have good days and then bad days, and your good days might be shorter, and you might have more bad days, but you kind of have, as long as you can keep it moving forward and ticking over individually and as a business or whatever, then you can get to, hopefully get to a solution.
I want to talk, like, one of the things we were going to talk about is do a bit of a CEO or guru masterclass on risk and crisis management. So we're going to do that in a second. We're going to ask a whole series of questions around that. But in order to provide a bit more context for that, I'm going to ask you this final question about your expedition. So it's the end of a year and a half. You've been 537 days away from the world. Your rescue boat catches fire. Oh, of course it did. Of course it did. I mean,
you can't write this shit.
I wouldn't have you on the show if it didn't. So what happened next is a real lesson in that. Can you talk us through? I'd almost like to go T like minus 15 minutes. The boat's not on fire. What's the feeling? And then talk us through the next however long.
Yeah, so I mean, this just made the whole story in the end, and really kind of wraps the whole thing up, and certainly makes the book a compelling tale. But yeah, so T minus 15 minutes. So we're day 500 and something. We're in the middle of the Southern Ocean. We've just finished. We had to do a fly-off resupply of Mawson Station on our way home from Davis. There's 100 or so people on the ship. It's a brand new modern ice-rated vessel chartered by the Australian government to come and pick us up and do the crew change-outs and take us home. And 5th of April, 2021, we're now halfway across the Southern Ocean, 3 to 4 meter swells. So nothing too crazy, but there's a huge storm system bearing down on us with sort of 10 to 15 meter waves. It's a few days away if we don't get our skates on and get north and get back to Australia. We're still a week away from Australia, and the nearest land is a place called Heard Island, which is the most remote Australian territory out there, uninhabited, old whaling station, desolate, rainy, miserable place. But that's the nearest land. No other ships, nothing else in the area. It's very, very, very late in the summer. We're into April now, so the season is changing. Winter is coming, and it's the time to get out of the Antarctic region.
Get out of Dodge, quick.
Get out of Dodge. And so we're north of the 60-degree kind of delineation of Antarctic waters, and that. So we're in the roaring 50s or 40s or something like that. So in the middle of the Southern Ocean. And at that point, though, I'm a retired station leader, so I didn't have much of a role on the ship. I was sitting there doing my end of season report and doing like expedition and performance report interviews and playing cards, reading books, watching movies, just sort of chilling out, chatting to the other leadership on the ship and my team and whatever, and generally just hanging out. And so 10:58 in the morning, I was having a nap, which it's pretty hard to sleep on ships like that in the ocean. So you take your naps when you can. It was a relatively calm day, and so I was having a nap. And at 10:58 in the morning, I'm rudely awoken by the sound of the ship's fire alarms and the captain just straight over the radio or the PA system, just fire, in the engine room, not a drill, not a drill. And you can hear it in the speed and urgency of his voice. You're like, damn, this is real. And so I wake up, and the first thing is the ship's on emergency lighting. So it's dark. You've got tiny bits of emergency lighting, and you can smell smoke and taste it in the air. And you're just like, yeah, you said there's a fire, and now you've got all that sensory overload of, there's definitely a fire. I can smell it. And I had to grab my life jacket, an immersion suit, which is, 5 to 10 kilo bag it's kind of like a wetsuit, but completely engulfs you and is watertight, and you can float in there. So I didn't have to put it on, but you got to carry that with you. And then another survival bag. So you've got kind of 20 kilos of bags and life jackets and stuff you've got to grab. And I run out of my cabin and had to go down a flight of stairs to get to the ship's forecastle, which is an enclosed area at the front of the ship, which was the muster point. And I'm heading there with 100 other people. So the hallways are now full of people with mismatched shoes and boots and jackets, and confusion of people just grabbing gear and not knowing do I need this, do I need a bag? And I'm just grab like life jacket, emergency suit, bags, like go, just keep moving, get everyone accounted for, and we can manage it later. And you get down to the muster point, and you go through, you punch it sort of like an old school punch ticket thing. You take your card and put it on marked. Yep, I'm at the muster point, and you check in and you're starting to account for everyone. And it was one of those moments where you're standing there, and for us, we've been away for a year and a half. This was our ride home, and we were at this point, a week away from being home, and you're standing on the ship on fire going, of course, like, what the hell? We're about to get in the lifeboats and abandon ship in the middle of nowhere. We know there's no rescue ship anywhere nearby, that we're days or weeks away from a rescue ship getting close to us. And initially you're trying to downplay it in your own mind. You're going, that's all right. There's false alarms on these ships all the time. Sure, it's just a small fire. And one of the guys who was there down there in the forecastle, he'd been up on the bridge, and he'd seen the fire and had pulled out, rather than running for cover, he'd pulled out his phone and took a video of it, which the ATSB and AMPS are really loved because it's a great photo or great video of it. But when I saw that footage of an absolute fireball just exploding out of one of the engine inlets and engulfing part of the superstructure of the ship in flames, and it torched 2 IRBs or Zodiacs were melted instantly and just turned into a rubbery goo. And I'm looking at that fireball being like, oh my God, this isn't the kind of toaster fire. This ship that's an explosion. And then it went, and then it kind of, you trigger, you're like, yeah, we actually might be getting the lifeboats here. This is going to get pretty hairy. And there was also a moment of when we were one short on the muster. And so the first thing you're doing is trying to account for everyone. And the ship ends up one short on the muster, an engine room mechanic, when you've had a catastrophic explosion in an engine room. And at that moment, I remember just going, oh God, thank God I'm not in charge of this. Is one of those moments you're like, oh, wow. But then just empathy for like the captain and the voyage leader standing up there on the bridge, one short on the muster, ship on fire, middle of the Southern Ocean. They've put the Mayday call into Regional Control Centre Canberra to AMSA, and just saying like, Mayday, 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 ship on fire, middle of the Southern Ocean. AMSA are like, well, cool, copy that, but there's no one around you. So let us know when you abandon ship or what you're going to do. And that feeling of what would have gone through their hearts up on the bridge, and I'm very good mates with the voyage leader, and we've done some combined talks about this as well. And those moments, that's as real as it gets when you're just standing there going, the decisions we make now are going to be pretty like absolutely life and death for the safety of everyone and on board and the safety of the vessel. So it was a pretty harrowing moment. Thankfully, we did survive and everyone came home safely, and including that mechanic was found.
Fine.
Yeah, he was fine. He was just on the wrong side of the fire, and he was able to get himself to safety, but couldn't get to a phone and couldn't get out.
Right. So presumably you didn't have to abandon ship. Yeah, they got it under control, and you're able to.
We did. It took a number of hours. So the crew were the main firefighting response, but for a number of reasons that we also had to help out. So a number of my team who had firefighting experience jumped onto fire hoses and helped with the ship's response. And it took about 6 hours until we had everything under control and the one remaining engine house that was unharmed. And it was quite a complicated way to do this. So I don't know the full technical details, but the ship itself was then kind of, if you think of a Tesla, if it's got one wheel off, the Tesla's going to say, no, I'm not driving on 3 wheels. Whereas an 88 Hilux won't care. It's like, oh yeah, just put a couple of bricks on the back corner and you'll be able to drive on 3 wheels. But a Tesla's not going to let you do it. And this ship was more along the Tesla line. So it didn't really want to drive on one engine with one engine house scorched. And so they had to confuse the computer and kind of get it to think that it was all right. And so they got it going again. But the change then of now, we're limping home. We diverted at that point. We're slightly closer to Fremantle. So a decision was made that we divert to Freo. And it still took a week to get back. And that week on reduced power, the ship would normally do about 12 to 13 knots. We'd drop down, we'd do about 5 or 6 knots. So much slower. The vibe on the ship, as we're through the worst of it, but we still know we're now, we're on the one remaining engine house. At that point, anytime there'd be a change in the ship's, the RPMs of the engine, people would be out of their cabins being like, we changed speed, what are we doing? 3.5 knots, 3.5 knots, we're doing 4 knots. Why don't we do 4? Last night we were doing 4.2 knots. Why are we doing 4 knots? They're like, everyone cared about that stuff. And also but the human side of it was great. So prior to that, everyone sat in their own, most people shared a cabin, but you'd stay in your cabin, you'd read a book, and people were social, but not too social. After the fire and in that period on the way home, people would sit around in like groups of 4 or 5 in cabins, watching movies, reading books, discussing things. And I ran a seminar on on understanding threat response and human response to fear and all those the Cooper's conditions and all these things that no one had really studied before. It's very military law enforcement stuff to do. And I sort of ran people through that to help them understand what they'd been through and how your body and your mind will respond to fear and extreme threat, which the average person doesn't take the time to unpack and understand. So we did a bit of that whilst trying to then help those that were really struggling or weren't aware they were struggling, doing what we could to help them on the ship. And it led to some varied responses. And, some people have had long-term impacts from that scenario that still to this day they're grappling with. And it's the sort of thing that, that really sticks with you. Like I remember that 10:58 on the 5th of April, 2021, like it was just a moment in time. It's just bang. I remember the feelings, the thoughts, the tastes, the smells of that exact moment. And similar to other moments in other scenarios where they stick with you and you're back there straight away.
Let's talk about this masterclass in risk and crisis management. What do you mean by that? Because when does something get into a crisis? Is there a particular criteria that you follow? And I suppose what I'd like us to be able to do as we talk through this is most of our listeners work in really, small, medium, or large organizations where maybe the stakes as far as life and death aren't as high, but the response to risk can almost be risk averse in some cases, like as a do not want any downside. So we don't have because risk isn't in your face, it's got to be in words on a page. We're not close to it, and we don't engage our emotion very well in this process. And in fact, most executives I speak to, it's not about risk appetite. It's just avoid. Sorry, I don't know if that's very good context, by the way.
No, it's perfect.
But
and I love talking about this stuff because I've come from careers and locations where risk to life and kind of state survival and stuff as well comes into it in war zones and some sort of that sort of stuff. Like it's as big a stakes as it gets, and decisions that you make on a battlefield or on a ship on fire, decisions can cost lives, and inaction can be just as deadly as action. And getting your head around that, and they teach you that in the early days of military training and everything as well, that the worst decision can be no decision. You have be decisive. If you've got to
it's actually a decision, isn't it?
Oh, exactly.
It's actually a decision. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's that whole thing of if you've got an hour, a perfect plan that takes 61 minutes is a fail. You have 1 hour to achieve this objective, and that is your goal. And you just get so focused on that environment, and a plan that will achieve that objective or do have a good go at it. That's the most important thing. And generally speaking, they'll never fail you in your military assessments for a decision that was tactically acceptable, but they will fail you for inaction or a plan that was going to be too slow or too long. So it's that sort of things. But to kind of then transition it to the fields that maybe aren't as life and death. And I always love the difference of speaking to an audience. And I did a talk over in Perth recently to a group of fire and emergency services workers. And it was just such a good crowd because they deal with life and death situations and car accidents and all sorts of stuff just day in, day out. Their understanding of risk and chaos and their attitude to it. And it's the same when you talk to cops or paramedics or anyone. Their understanding of risk and also their attitude is often really, it can look blasé or it can look lighthearted, and there's dark humor and all those other elements to it. And exactly. So the most serious of industries and day-to-day lives, they don't take it that seriously. But you go and speak to, and I'm going to use a bad example here, and apologies to anyone from this profession that's in it, but you go and speak to a team of real estate agents where it's not life and death, it is houses and it is sheep stations. But sometimes you'll have industries that can take things so life and death, and you're like, well, it's not actually life and death. There's houses and some things, and there's plenty of other examples out there of industries that will take it out. So to kind of unpack that then around risk, it comes down to, and you talked about there, I've got some great thoughts on this. And one of them is that you assess risk with your eyes and what's between your two ears. Paperwork, processes, they're all necessary, but they will not actually assess your risk and solve your risk. So if you're going through a checklist or you're going through paperwork or you're going, oh, we need to do a risk assessment on this, is that risk assessment a process thing, or are you actually assessing the risk? Have you got the right people with the right eyes and experience and the goo between their ears actually assessing that risk? Because if you're just putting it through a process to come up with an answer that you probably already know, you're wasting everyone's time. And if you know what the risk is, tying that risk to your goals of well, it might be risky to do this. You're like, yes, but if we're here to sell houses or we're here to save lives or we're here to do this, we have to take that risk to do that. And that's what we exist to do. And you talked earlier about boards and as these companies get bigger, they lose that of well, we wouldn't be where we were today if we hadn't taken risks, and we wouldn't achieve our core business of whatever it is without taking risks. And you have to find a way to go, we have to take some of these risks. And inaction and indecision can be far more costly in the long run of just sitting there waiting it out. And there'd be a number of corporate examples in recent times, something like Blockbuster or something. Okay, so they had a Motorola at points, or BlackBerry, where you've got huge market share and you are the thing. And you go, well, no, let's just keep what we're doing. We'll just come out with the BlackBerry 10 and then the BlackBerry 11. And sure enough, they'd missed the boat to go, well, actually, why don't we come up with the smartphone? And they don't do that. Blockbuster could have been, at one point, they could have bought Netflix or something and become Netflix, but they didn't. They, for whatever reason, they stuck to their business model, didn't take any other risks of new industries, and it stops. And that's where I love to unpack risk and really look at it and go, you've got to take the risk. You've got to find a way to get comfortable with it. Unfortunately, then, as those in the leadership positions will then know, you have to then accept that if it doesn't work, that failure is an option. And you then have to learn from that and be willing to move on and take it, rather than just stay there, be indecisive, not take any risks and survive. It's an option, but is it actually going to achieve your goals, or is it just going to achieve kind of purgatory?
one of the real challenges in the corporate world is we very rarely get feedback immediately about the action we take and decision we make and if it's been effective. So we might make a decision now to launch a new product or to change a factory or move something or move jurisdictions for tax reasons or something. But we really don't get the feedback on that for 6 months, sometimes 2 to 3 years. When often we're gone by then and someone else has to deal with it.
Yep.
Any guidance on how that would affect your decision making in the moment when the feedback loop is generally in the years?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real tough one. And there's probably no answer on that. You got to try and look at indicators that can give you some sort of indication that it is going well, or backing it in and saying, yep, that is the plan. And we have to just let it run for 2 years. Because one of the things I hate to see, and you see this a lot in corporate, and you see it in government with a 3-year election cycle and everything as well, is have you given it the time to work? Okay, was it a 3-year plan? And now have the conditions changed significantly that we need to abandon that plan? Or it is a 3-year plan, we're at a year going, this hasn't worked. You go, what? So do we abandon it or not? Now, you don't want to be, like I said earlier, you don't want to be too tied to a plan that's going to fail. But if you've not given it the success or the chance for success, and it's the conditions are still the same, and the environment is the same that you set out on that course, have you run it its full term to go, right, it was a 3-year plan. We will make the decision at the 2-year mark when we finally do get some feedback. But at the 1-year mark, we can't abandon this plan. And I'm sure your listeners and yourself have seen plenty of examples where a plan might have worked in the long run, but it got abandoned too soon because people got nervous and they went back into their comfort zone.
Well, I think your point around no plan survives first contact, or you get punched in the face. Yeah. Good on you, mate. Well done. Yeah.
They're not mine, by the way. I stole them. Yep.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's all right. I think everyone sort of knows. Like, the interesting thing is, can you hold your nerve if you truly believe this is the right way? Or, as you said before, the data points, the early data points to say we're on track, we're not one. Like we entered an engagement like this. Oh my God, the weather's wrong. The plan is right if the weather comes good. Oh, hold on. Like, do we need to adjust immediately, or do we just cop getting a hammer in for a day, so to speak? So I think there's some great lessons in there about having the data. Do you still believe in the plan? Do you need to shift a bit instead of attacking from this angle, attack from this angle, or partner with someone new, or enter a different market, or, and that's a really, really interesting challenge.
Yeah, and it's interesting to set those out. So I did this with one of the Antarctic trips. So for the last 2 years, I've been running a deep field team, and the first year was building the base camp, and the second year was the main scientific year that we just did this summer. But the important thing was, it was a 3-year project. I was only doing the first 2 years, and then someone else is going back this summer to kind of pack it all up. But when we went out there for the first year, we had to build the base camp. So we're going to this old, small summer camp that had been built in the 80s and was at end of life. We had to, and it could sustain about 10 people. We had to build the base camp for 42 people, 2 helicopters, 2 planes, and a whole range of things to a pretty good standard. So we went out there with all these goals. But when I wrote up the mission planning for that, was really clear about what our minimum acceptable standard was, or for success, that meant the second year could go ahead. So yes, we had these goals of we need to build 8 melons, 3 tent platforms, find the water source, find the generator spots, site the helipads, site the landing zones, do all these different things, test the lake water, test the alternate water support supplies, and do all these different things and achieve it all in a kind of 90-day work window, which you'll lose a third to weather anyway, and then take out fatigue days and all the other things as well. So, but it was this case of, okay, there's the gold standard of all the stuff we want to achieve, but what is the minimum acceptable criteria that we have built enough to sustain a second year, and when do we change that? And that was then what we worked towards. If you're going, okay, we have to achieve this much, and at points though, you're still jumping around and go, all right, the conditions today will go hard on, we'll do this thing, not that thing, and you're still working towards your minimal acceptable standards. And that is an important part of planning, not just, we're going to achieve all of this, but okay, when it gets to the compromise, and we did this then for this recent summer where it's always over ambitious with Antarctic summers of you're trying to squish far too much in, and everyone goes down there with the big shopping list of things. And I had scientists from a number of different universities, a number of different sub-projects within the two major university-funded streams, and then some other bits of ad hoc science from wildlife monitoring and other bits as well to kind of assess the human impact of the other science that they're doing, and the world goes around. But from day one, I really hammered it into the scientists, and I had a great scientific coordinator as well who helped with this. Just going, have your priorities ready to go, so that if we walk out and say, right, the weather conditions are such that we can go to these 3 locations, you know that you can go to that location and achieve your priority 3 objective, as opposed to sitting around waiting to go to the location that's your objective 1, because that may not come for another week or 2. And having that process, I found that the planning cycles in Antarctica are great, because it comes down to the weather, and you always have this plan of how your season will play, and you'll always go, okay, we've got our 1 month concept of operations, and we've got a 2-week planning cycle, and we'll do a 72-hour planning thing. And it always just comes back to a almost 48 to 72-hour planning process is all you can ever deal with, because the forecast beyond that is never any real indicator of what the weather's going to do. You get all these bizarre human factors, and then priorities change and all this sort of stuff. So you just end up coming back to this very short, very dynamic planning cycle where everyone has to be ready to go and do almost anything every day when the things change. And there was some great flexibility shown by the team when you just, the whole thing would go out the window for whatever reason, be it where there are operational factors, or there's a problem with a helicopter, which means we can only do a limited range with 1 helicopter and do the search and rescue for that helicopter if there's an incident that can be done on foot or quad bike. And you just walk into the team and go, here it is the plan. We're not doing this. We can do this. If anyone, I've got 1 seat on that helicopter now. If anyone's got a project that can fit with that, and you got 20 minutes to get back to me with who can fit into what we can now do or can't do. And rather than sit there going like, oh, but you said this and the plan was that, the team would sit there and go, okay, great. There's opportunities. I can do this. Or if I now work with them, or this person goes as my helper to this location, that they can do their priority 4 thing at their location while I'll do my priority 2 thing. And that degree of flexibility is remarkable.
Too.
Yeah. Oh, incredible. Sorry, I went on a tangent there, but
Oh, that's the right kind of tangent. What a brilliant description of what actually goes on down there.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is you were saying then you can't really operate outside of this 48, 72-hour block, but you still do the whole plan.
Oh, yeah.
Right, because it's almost like you need to know where this is going to end up, and then all the potential permutations and combinations to get there, whatever they are. But as a leader, you know all the different parts that have got to be in place to build this thing. And because you've done the prep and you've done all the plan, you can always come back and you can move the pieces, right? But you still got to do all those bits of work.
Oh, yeah. And that was the thing from the start, that we had a plan and a loose sequence of how it would build. And a lot of that did fit to the season. We started operating in November when the weather's still the tail of the season, kind of lagged a little bit from the calendar. And so you go, okay, we're going to be able to do the bulk of the work in January when the weather's warmer and the conditions should be better. And then there was actually some then operational factors that meant January wasn't as successful as we wanted. We had some issues with having to get retasking helicopters to do other things that were not our core job. And that kind of distracted a little bit, but it's all part of the Antarctic workplace where there's redundancy, but not a lot of it. So the minute something else comes up, your priorities get curtailed a bit. But everyone knowing that there was a plan and that nothing was ever off the table, and right up to the last days when we're out there, and we're now getting into February, and we're packing up the camp this is great. This is one of those great things as well, where you're taking Australia's best and brightest minds on climate science, and all of a sudden you're going, well, you might have been Australia's leading geologist for the last 60 days. At this point where we've now entered phase 3, which is the pack up phase, you're now just a labourer. So I need you to, start letting this gear down, and they'll be like, okay. And yet staying on the camp during that phase meant that if the opportunities came up, they could still do some bits of science. And so it was just eking out, bringing like kind of every last little bit we could, and staying ready to go to the end, and running kind of concurrent pack down like camp pack down and operations. And geez, that made a few people nervous back in not in Canberra, in Kingston, which is where the head office for Antarctic program is, and even on camp. And that's where you really, you earn your money at those points in the leadership roles, like in the early phases or when it's all going well and it's hashtag Antarctica and everyone's getting what they want. It tends to be fairly straightforward if you just sign off on things, make sure everyone's communicating and make sure everyone's aware of the plan and it kind of runs. But I earned my money as the field leader at that tail end when you've got a week or two of weather left and you've got competing factors of you've got to get everyone back to the main station. People have got flights to get back to to Australia. You got to pack down the camp, leave it ready for next year, get as much science done. At this point, people have felt they've not had opportunities to do things. And you've got the camp, like the building manager in my face, just kind of being like, pulls me into my own office and goes, we've got to send people home. We've got too many people on the camp. We can't handle the water supply and the kitchen's got to pack down and the chef's going like, I can't do that. And you just got all this stuff and you kind of have to calm everyone down in different ways to say, just trust me, I know what I'm doing with this stuff. I can see your concerns. I can see the risks, but these are risks worth taking because we came here to achieve as much science as possible. We will run science right up until the last possible moment, and on the proviso that those scientists know that if they are here, they are also here as labourers. And then also we're going to drop the standard of living of like, okay, yes, we've had a full working field kitchen up until this point. We're now going to drop down to kind of, okay, the requirement is going to be, there will be a hot water urn is about all we can do for this remaining. So you'll be eating 2-minute noodles out of a packet, which is still pretty good. And, you kind of, we had a basic shower system. You're like, that's going to go as well. So you go, right, everyone have a last shower. For the last week out here, and the shower is a great inverted commas thing. It was a bird bath with a bucket and a squeegee, like that's it. But you go, that's going. So we're going to drop the standard of living. We're going to drop the conditions. You can't sacrifice. You're not going to drop your medical capabilities. So you're keeping that operational, and you kind of, so you find areas to sort of weave between and trim it down. And thankfully at the end, it all went, incredibly well and we got as much done. And those that had been like, oh, geez, I doubted, I didn't think that was the right thing to do. And you kind of go, yeah, well, that's what I got paid to do. Or that was why I was given that job. And with the experience, I had to see where the opportunities are to actually get as much done as you can.
Outstanding. Righto, Chiefs. More from David in a minute. Now, recently, we had the remarkable Nigel Marsh on the show. Nigel is the former CEO of Leo Burnett and Y&R Brands, a viral TEDx talker, the founder of Earth Hour, and is a best-selling author and podcaster. We spoke about following your own path to achieve true life balance before it's too late, getting cut through, and authentic success. Here's what Nigel had to say about self-reflection.
Nice client of mine, CEO, said, Nigel, I know that when I die, my to-do list will be full. Not empty, full.
Yeah.
All that stuff never ends. And guess what? No one's going to notice. The tide will still come in and go out. So you have to be concentrating on stuff that you're talking about. And that doesn't mean you haven't got to work hard and do things that are boring. You have, but just have an aim. In 10 years' time, Greg is going to look back. Are you going to be happy with how you spent the 10 years?
You can listen to that brilliant conversation with Nigel Marsh by going to chiefmaker.com/352. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the podcast and check out all the other great interviews with our chiefs and gurus, as well as all the mini-sodes by going to chiefmaker.com/listen now. Righto, Chief, let's get back to David Knoff. David, in a minute, I want to do our final rapid fire questions. But before that, I've just got a couple of final questions around risk and crisis management. This is like really generic. Where do you think most leaders go wrong with risk and crisis management? Is it, if you could boil it down to one thing they get wrong?
Overthinking it.
Overthinking it.
Overthinking it. Yep. Risks, I think in a lot of ways, you'll know it inherently. If you've got the right experience, you should be able to identify the actual risks straight away. And I see it, people overthink it and start just filling the gaps or filling it up with additional risks that are either just inherent risks of doing business. You're like, oh, well, what if this? You're like, well, yeah, well, what if that every day? Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, what is the actual risk we're looking at on this particular program? Let's look at that and focus on that one thing, and then having the right experience in the room to assess it and go from there. So overthinking.
Yep, that makes good sense. If you had one principle that you could take into any room when they're doing risk crisis management, what would it be?
Keep your eyes open. And they talk about the OODA loop when we're on training sessions. That's a classic military thinking process. We observe, orientate, decide, act. Keeping your eyes open to the situation, or keep your eyes up. And certainly as a leader, stay back and keep your eyes up to whatever the conditions, because as they're changing, you then need to change the plan. So that's where your differences between either your CEO and your COO or your ops teams and leadership, really, that's where they earn their money. Of your job as the leader is to stay back and look up and try to keep your hands off the tools.
Okay, mate. Rapid fire questions, right? All our chiefs answer this. So if you could form the ultimate executive team, now I'm going to say that's either for a business or for leading the world's, like leading a mission to Mars, maybe, to the poles of Mars, of course. If you could form the ultimate executive team, any well-known leader from any time in history, who would your first 3 picks be and why?
All right. Okay, so we're going to lead a mission to Mars, any historical figure. I'd be picking Ernest Shackleton to take the leadership role as the expedition leader on the voyage to Mars. And I think then around that, you're going to want, if you're going to do that trip, you're going to want someone like either Da Vinci or Nikola Tesla or someone as your kind of chief technical officer or
engineer.
Your engineer.
Creative mind engineer,
Correct. So you're going to, probably Da Vinci or someone like that.
CTO.
Correct. Who else are you going to need? You'd probably take a few good astronauts. So you're going to want Jim Lovell from Apollo 13 or someone like that in there as well for good measure. That'll be my 3 that I'm taking. That's
pretty cool. Shackleton, Da Vinci, Lovell. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Outside of work experience, what has been the most valuable structured learning program of your career?
Not so much structured to it, but the social endeavors I've been involved in. So back at university, I was really involved in the clubs and societies, ran a lot of events for the clubs there. And that, I think, has paid dividends right up into this day and continues to, and it will continue to for the rest of my career. Of your ability to put on a good show, run an event, get people to show up, sell it, pitch it, sell it, make it work, make everyone have fun, ensure that everyone's having fun, ensure it's happening safely, and all these sorts of things. That was the best experience I ever got, and really, certainly it worked in my diplomatic careers, but running an Antarctic station as the station leader, you often have to make your own fun and make the party. And I look back and go, well, you get good at running events and parties when you're at uni.
Yes, yes. I was involved, former president of the Beer Appreciation Society at the University of Queensland.
Oh, great. Yeah, good one. And I'm sure you still use those skills to this day.
Yeah, I do, in fact. What is the best advice a mentor has ever given you?
Say yes is the best advice I've ever got. Is just when you get an opportunity or something comes up, say yes and work out the how later. And the best example of that is, and actually, we ended up christening this boat as the Boat of Chiefs. So I would speak well to your podcast. But in my time when I was working in Pakistan, and a lot of my friends were all in and out of the war zones around there for a number of years. And at the end of that, we were all wrapping up. A mate sent an email around to a bunch of people who just said, "Hey, I'm going to charter a yacht and sail to Antarctica. Who wants in?" And I just said yes. Had no idea of the details or the costs or anything like, knowing that it would be expensive. And that was my first trip to Antarctica. We ended up going snowboarding for a month down there, which was good mountaineering. But I just said, an opportunity like that comes up, you say yes and work out the rest of it later. And there was people that dithered on that decision and missed the boat.
Missed the boat. The Boat of Chiefs. What is your number one interview question when recruiting senior leaders to your team?
Yeah, it would be around, depending on how you'd phrase it, but in terms of what are you going to bring to the party? So what's your party trick in a more corporate sense of what I look for with the Antarctic scenarios, and some of that will be, okay, and we did this at one of our not selection camp, but it was a training camp before we went down this summer with the scientists, of almost like out of Apollo 13, but slightly different, giving them a box of the food to say, right, when we're down there, we're out in the field, we will have a chef, but she'll need days off, and or the chef might not be available for whatever reason, and you're going to have to cook your own meals using the contents of this box, and it's a pretty boring box of stuff, and you're putting a bunch of scientists in a kitchen that's crowded and doesn't have all the utensils, doesn't have all the spices, doesn't have anything you might want. You can't go to the shops, but here's your box of food. I want a 3-course meal with hors d'oeuvres and entrees and everything, and you've got an hour or 2 hours, whatever I gave them. And that's what I want to see from anyone I'm taking on an Antarctic expedition or anyone I'm going to work with is, yeah, you've got the skills and the resume. That's how you got to this interview. Great. Everyone else that got to interviews, tick that box. What are you going to do in a situation like that? If you've got the bare bones, or what can you cook with nothing, or what's your musical instrument? What do you bring to the party outside of your work?
Can you nominate another chief or guru you hold with great respect for the podcast?
The ops manager who saw my team through, so the ops manager back in Kingston, a bloke called Rob Clifton, he's been on a few podcasts and he's got a very interesting story to tell. He'd be a good one to have. He's one of the few people to have summited Big Ben on Heard Island back in the 90s with a small team, and I've done a few things in Antarctica, but he's certainly seen and done a lot as well. So, or the other one might be the voyage leader from the story of the ship, bloke called Andy Chunky. Track him down. He'd be an interesting one to hear the other side of what happened up on the bridge.
Yeah, wow.
Ship.
Yeah. Okay, if you could lead any organisation in the world, who would that be? So which would that be?
It'd be one of the space agencies. Whether or not it's NASA, I think they might have, like, that structure might not have worked. So I probably wouldn't want to take Elon's, the way he runs SpaceX is very much him. I don't think anyone else could run it. So I couldn't name it, but a space agency or
Virgin Galactic, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But again, their businesses are so tied to the individual. Virgin is very much Richard, and
yeah, sure, yep.
And Bezos is doing it. So that's I'd run one of those.
Nice. What is a final message of wisdom and hope for chiefs around the world?
Say yes to opportunities. Don't be too tied to the plan, and assess risk with the goo between your ears and your eyes. That's what it all comes down to.
Nice. David, look, what a remarkable story. Like, just fascinating to hear the rich detail of your experience. Thank you for sharing so generously and just being just a fantastic guy. Thank you.
No, thanks, Greg, and thanks, Chiefs. Enjoy your day.
Chief, that sums it up for this week, and the remarkable, interesting, resilient, and all-round nice guy, David Knoff. Highly encourage you to check out his book and his own resources online. All the links can be found in the show notes. Just go to chiefmaker.com/355. And if you would like to stay in touch and hear all about some of the best resources you can find anywhere in the world to improve your performance at work, go to chiefmaker.com/subscribe. Now, Chief, if you're yet to rate the episode and subscribe, I hope you'll do so soon. It helps others see the magnificent value that the chiefs and gurus bring to their life and career. So make sure you hit subscribe on your podcast app now, give it a 5-star rating if you think it's worthy, and leave a short review about your favourite episode. Righto, Chiefs, as always, remember to stay epic.